Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/Teamaneke.
So earlier you learned about First Paw Coffee Company, and now I'm going to tell you about its Tail Wagger Blend. First Paw Coffee Company's Tail Wagger Blend is their first offering, and its name and label were crowdsourced from their Facebook fans. How cool is that? The Tail Wagger Blend is a private label premium blend that was developed just for them. It is a medium roast from Colombian beans with tastes of Brazil nuts, grapefruit, and oak. Be sure to go to ak.dog/free and enter to win a bunch of cool prizes. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to our daily coverage of the 2020 Iditarod here on dogworksradio.com and KVRF 89.7 in the Matsu Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is their live streaming site, and you can find all of our episodes over on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, iTunes Radio, and many more places. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and we are joined today by my co-host, Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going today?
It's going great, Robert. I've been spending a lot of time looking at the trackers and sort of monitoring what's going on and watching some of the live feeds, and it's very exciting. And in the front of the pack, we have Jesse Royer, who was the first into CalTag. We weren't sure last night if they could take their 8-hour Yukon rest at CalTag, but apparently they can. So she's there, Brent Sass is there, and Thomas Werner and Pete Kaiser are there as well. And of those four, Werner is the only one who has taken his 8-hour rest already. So it looks like once his dogs get a little bit of rest from their last run, he should be leaving CalTag on the way to Unalakleet probably about an hour or so before Jesse does.
Well, and I know last night we were talking about Jesse Royer being the one, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the show. But first, we're going to talk about this dang coronavirus and how it's developing even more of a story along the Iditarod Trail. There were some signs posted right after we aired last night in Shaktoolik and Nulato and whatnot. What is happening out there in relation to this?
So first of all, I think both of us would rather talk about anything else in the world other than the coronavirus. But the race is now basically bypassing the villages of Nulato and Shaktoolik. And in fact, Shaktoolik is being transformed from a full checkpoint to now it's just a resupply point. And they moved all of the drop bags and all of the straw and the heat 2 miles out of town to the kind of old village of Shaktoolik. And they're telling mushers that they are not to go into Shaktoolik, that they are not allowed on the grounds there. They can't go into the school. They can't get hot showers. They can't have any sort of shelter, which traditionally, that's where a lot of people will go to take shelter, especially if there's bad weather coming in. In Nulato, they also moved the checkpoint outside of town to the side of the river, but they kept it as a checkpoint. So they still had vets and checkers and people there. So, this is something that basically developed right about 24 hours ago as we were getting off the air. And it is, it's something that I think has kind of altered my perception of what's going to happen with the race. And last night I said that I didn't think that there was any chance that the race would be stopped early. And I'm now thinking that I still don't know that that's going to happen, but I think it's much more of a possibility than it was 24 hours ago. And I think the next, 24 to 48 hours will sort of tell us what's going to happen. And in my mind, what it boils down to is Mark Nordman has said that that if the governor tells him that they need to stop the race, then there's no choice, and they will stop the race. But what seems to be happening is a lot of the schools on the Bering Strait are all going to be closed because of coronavirus. A lot of the villages are becoming much more wary of having people from outside the villages come in and be possible carriers. We talked a little bit about how this could really just completely overwhelm the hospital beds and healthcare facilities in some of these villages. And I said on Facebook this afternoon that I never envy Mark Nordman, who's the race marshal, for his job, because he has a very difficult job of having to kind of balance the interests of a whole bunch of people, including the race, the ITC, the mushers, the fans, the villages, the volunteers, and all of those people. And it feels like right now we're in the position where not only are people racing to get to Nome, but there's also a race to try to get everyone safely off the trail before there are much more drastic steps that need to be taken for the coronavirus. And I still do not think that the race is going to be stopped in the middle, the way it was in the Finnmark at Slopet. But I think there is more of a possibility that it could be stopped before all of the mushers come in. And I was talking to someone on Twitter this afternoon who said, well, maybe they would let the first 20 mushers come in. So that's basically everyone who is in the money, and then just stop the race after that. And there's a number of problems with that, not the least of which is, how do you get these people off the trail if they are in, a half dozen or a dozen small villages? Another possibility is they might hold some of the people at Unalakleet because it's easier to get air in and out of there. And again, I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but I think that this is, last night I was probably 90% sure that the race would go on until the Red Lantern came into Nome. And now I'm feeling like only about 50% sure that that's going to happen.
You talked about a lot of the schools that are closing up, and when we were on the Serum Run expedition, we stayed in a lot of these schools pretty much from Tanana all the way to Nome. And one thing I would like to comment on is just the outpouring of public support in these villages, and especially the kids. They loved coming out to see the dog teams and meet all of us, the snow machiners and the dog mushers, and pet the dogs and do all that. It was really the highlight of their day. And I was reading on Facebook or Twitter or something that it's really sad for that, because a lot of times this is their big interaction of the year. This is their Super Bowl. This is their circus, and they really enjoy that. And unfortunately, the kids are going to be one of the ones that feel the impact of this the most. And secondly, you talked about the race ending potentially before it's over. And, I think what's interesting is you talked about Shaktoolik, which is past Unalakleet. I think that if they were to end it, I think that they would probably stop it, like you said, in Unalakleet, and then, let the other folks, because these first 5 or 10 people are going to be in Unalakleet and out probably as early as tomorrow. It's only about 85 miles from Caltag to Unalakleet, so they could easily be there early afternoon tomorrow, depending on what time they leave tonight. So I think it's definitely a fluid situation, and it will be interesting to see how it pans out over the next 24 hours or so. And our friends in Nome, we were talking to them about the Serum Run as well, and they're having a lot of difficulty getting stuff in and out. A lot of Alaska air flights have been canceled because of the storms that they have out there, and of course all of the cargo is stuck there as well. So I know Iditarod has a much bigger logistic network than just an individual or two. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And lastly, Alex, I wonder what they're doing with the media, because I say that they said that only essential personnel are allowed to travel up and down the trail. So we're thinking about, the vets and all of that, because I've seen on Facebook where a lot of the people that were planning on flying out to some of these further down the trail checkpoints like Chaktulik or Koyuk or Elam, and they haven't left yet, have been told that they are not going. Do you know what they're doing with the media? Obviously, they're still following along the trail as well.
Yeah, I think that the certainly the insider is there, and I know that some of the bigger and more prominent sources of Iditarod news, like the Alaska Public Radio, Alaska Public Media, has people who are fairly far along the trail, and several of the television stations also have people who are fairly far down the trail. But I would imagine that, I don't really know, but I would imagine that the Iditarod is contacting a lot of these people and either trying to get them not to go or trying to get them to go with a much smaller crew than they would usually have. The other point that I wanted to make, and I wanted to be really, really clear about this, that I said on Facebook, is that I don't always understand the decisions that are made by the ITC and the decisions that are made by the race marshal. But I always assume that they have a lot more information than I do, and they have a lot more information than the fans do. And one of the things that I just have a tremendous amount of respect for Mark Nordman about is that he has to make the tough decisions. And every year we see him make decisions that make at least some people unhappy. And I think that depending on how things go, in the next few days, there's a chance that he might have to make some decisions that will make a bunch of people unhappy. And it's my fervent belief down to my core that this is a man who is acting in good faith and trying to pick the best possible outcome, taking into account that he has to keep the best interests of the race in mind, all of the dogs, all of the mushers, all of the volunteers and vets and fans. And I think it's pretty much impossible to make everybody happy. But it is my very, very deep belief that whenever he makes these hard decisions, that he is doing it out of good faith.
I saw something on Facebook earlier today, or it could have been in the USA Today. It was about the NHL canceling, the National Hockey League. And one of the folks in the media said, no matter what, it's still just sports. There are more important things in the world than sports. And I think that sort of plays out with this, even though it's still, cultural relevance and all of that. It's still just a race and it's still just sports. And I think there are some bigger things that we have to deal with other than that. So we'll see how it plays out. But before we speculate any further, because obviously you and I are not in the know, so to speak, let's go to our next story of the day, and that's kind of a feel-good story. It's about Lance Mackey. I know we've talked a lot about Lance this year already, but he is doing something special with his mom's ashes. What do you know about that?
Yeah, so his mother, Kathy, has been involved with the race since 1973. So since the very first year. She died last April after the race, and Lance is carrying her ashes with him on the trail. And he sprinkled some of them at Ophir because his mother was good friends with Audra Ferguson, who was the former owner of the cabin in Ophir that serves as the checkpoint. And he also said that he wants to sprinkle the rest of her ashes at the airport in Nome because she was a pilot. And he said that he hopes a spinning prop from a plane will spread her ashes out to sea. And there was a really cool article and a brief video interview with him And one of the things that he said is that his mother always told me there's still hope. And I think that that's a very powerful message for, certainly for all mushers and, probably for the rest of us as well.
Michelle and I, my wife Michelle and I, really got to know Kathy well several years ago when she was living right here in the Matsu Valley. And she was one of the first people in Alaska that sort of took she and I under her wing. And we spent many hours in her living room talking dogs and talking sports and just sort of not only the sports side of it, but also the politics side of it. And what a wealth of information that Kathy was. And when she passed away, we definitely had our remembrances for her. And I'm sure that Lance is doing her proud by taking her along. I know that he said something like to the effect that she has a smile on her face right now as he travels down the trail. So I think that's a really cool story in this kind of troubling time with coronavirus and everything else that's happening during the race.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Lance is doing surprisingly well. Lance said at the beginning of this race, well, I'm going to really be racing to win it. And, frankly, Lance has said that the last 8 or 9 years when he's entered Iditarod and, especially recently, just has not been anywhere near the front of the pack. But he's been in the top 10 for most of this race. I think he's currently like 11th or 12th. And, he's looking, he's not looking like peak Lance Mackey from 2008 or 2009, but he's looking really, really good. And that is, as someone who really started becoming a huge Iditarod fan when Lance Mackey was in his prime, this just makes me really happy.
Yeah, he is doing well. He's definitely in that top 20 for sure. Lance, or I just called you Lance. Alex, real quick, you had a quick story about Richie Deal. This is one of those things that really got the fans in a fuss because of the tracker. And we talked about following the tracker and hitting that refresh button. And all of a sudden we saw him go out and then turn around and go back. What's the story with Richie?
Yeah. So what seems to have happened is he went out and then he started having some problems with his dogs, and then he came back to the checkpoint of Nulato, and he said that I believe one of his dogs was in heat, so his males were sort of, crowding around and wouldn't let that dog alone, and he tried to rearrange and reconfigure the team and put them in a a different order, and couldn't quite get them there. So he turned around and he went back to Nulato, and he was there for quite a while. And he told the Insider that he didn't really know what he was going to do. I'm not sure if he dropped that dog because the standings sometimes take a long time to refresh and to update. But I'm looking now, and he seems to have just left Nulato probably within the last 20 minutes or so. So he's continuing down the trail, but definitely lost a large amount of time.
Yeah, you had mentioned that it could have been a dog in heat, and I tell you, there's a heck of a lot of Iditarod trail puppies out there for sure. That's a common occurrence, especially as we move into spring. For folks that don't know, female dogs go into heat twice a year, and this is prime time for that to happen. So yeah, there are quite a few Iditarod trail puppies out there, I'm sure. And Alex, every year there seems to be some type of miracle on the trail, whether it be a vet helping out or a doctor helping out or a fellow musher saving somebody else. And this happened today in terms of a veterinary miracle. What happened?
Right. So this is a story about Matt Thaler, and he has a dog named Cool Cat, who is 9 years old, and he said that she's kind of the matriarch of his kennel, and he has a lot of her offspring on his team, and he was in Takatna and took his 24 in Takatna, and then as he was getting ready to leave, he noticed that Cool Cat wasn't doing very well, and she was whimpering, and this was not very usual, and she wouldn't get up. So he called a vet over to check on her, and the vet was, and all the vets on Iditarod, of course, are volunteers, but this is a vet named Jason Heesen of South Dakota, and they tried to get Cool Cat up on her feet, and they noticed that her stomach was completely swollen. It was the size of a beach ball, and Matt Fowler knew that it was twisted gut, which is a form of bloating where there's gas that builds up in the stomach, and it slows down your heart so that the heart can't work properly, and blood can't get circulated through the body. So she was already losing heat and becoming cold. And they took Cool Cat inside, Heesen and Fowler and another vet, and they were able to get a plan to take her to McGrath, where they had better facilities so they could do emergency surgery on her. But before they could do that, they needed to relieve this pressure on her stomach. So Heesen rolled Cool Cat onto her side, gave her a partial sedative, and found a place on her stomach where he could poke into the stomach and release all of this hot air. And Fowler said that the hot air just like poured out of her belly and instantly gave Cool Cat relief. So they put the dog in a blanket, and they were on the back of a snow machine, taking her to the airport so she could be flown to McGrath, where they were going to do the surgery. And it was snowing and blowing, and Fowler said that the vet just, Hazine took off his coat and sort of wrapped it around them to protect them from the snow. And Matt Fowler said it was like an angel protecting them from the weather. And by the time they got to the airport so that they could put her on this small plane and take her to McGrath, the dog already was feeling well enough so that it could get out of the snow machine by itself and go onto the plane. And Matt said that he took a photo of her because he wasn't sure that she would make it. They took her to McGrath, and they were able to again relieve the pressure on her, and they decided that her condition had improved so that they would fly her back to Anchorage and perform the emergency surgery in a more sterile and a more prepared environment. So they flew her back to Anchorage, and she had the emergency surgery and is now recovering, is expected to make a full recovery. And the vet who did the surgery in Anchorage said that the trail vet who had relieved this pressure absolutely and completely saved this dog's life. And Matt Fowler said that he plans to nominate Heesen and the other vet who assisted in Takatna for the Golden Stethoscope Award, which is an award that the mushers vote on, given to one of the veterinary staff. And, it's a very, very scary thing, especially when you have a dog who is so important to your kennel and to your whole operation. And I am really, really happy that this is a story that had a very happy ending.
It is a scary thing, Alex. Unfortunately, we had a couple of dogs in our kennel that died from this. It happens so quickly, and there's unless you have a veterinarian right there, there's very little you can do. We had a dog one time that this happened, and I did my best to rush her to the vet, which is about 25 miles away from here, and I was speeding down the Parks Highway, and unfortunately she passed away as we were going because of this, because obviously I don't have the experience to do what these guys did on the trail. So we hope that she does well, and as you said, she was the matriarch of the kennel. It's always tough to lose these guys, and it's not something you want to have weighing on your mind as you continue down the trail. So hopefully she does well, and it's a good outcome. Alex, who is our musher of the day?
So our musher of the day today is Casey Meringer, who is a rookie this year. She is almost at the very back of the pack. She's running a little bit ahead of Quince Mountain, who's the current Red Lantern. She is 29 years old, and she's going to turn 30 while she's out on the trail on her way to Nome. She grew up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula and ran her first dog sled race when she was 7 years old. And she had 2 dogs in a kids race and came in first. She hung around with, helped organize, volunteered for, and handled for various races in the Upper Peninsula, convinced her parents to help her find local mushers that she could train with and learn how to run their dogs and learn about the ins and outs of mushing. After she got her college degree, she decided she would spend a summer in Alaska working as a tour guide. And she liked it so much that she came back the next year and spent a second summer. And then after that, moved to Alaska permanently. She started working with Gold Rush Dog Tours and then worked some with Dallas Seavey's team. And then she joined Matt Failer's team in 2019 and ran her qualifiers. She has run the Copper Basin 300, the Kobuk 440, and the Goose Bay 150. And she said that as a kid, she remembered watching the UP 200 teams run along the trail, which was right behind her house. And that's what first sparked her interest in sled dogs. And she found local mushers who mentored her and then got her first 2 sled dogs, Kona and Blaz. And she says that she was telling the Insider that when she was on the trail early on, her dog team took a few wrong turns, but she was very careful not to freak out, because if the dogs sense that you're freaked out, they'll lose confidence. She is running Matt Failer's puppy team and just has absolute poise and confidence in the dogs. And it's amazing to see someone who is relatively new at the sport who has such complete confidence. And she told the Insider that really what she does when she gets to one portion of the trail is she just makes sure that the dogs get through it and that they're happy, and then looks forward to the next section of the trail. Obviously, she's running at the back of the pack. And in a race like this, there's a danger that, especially with everything that's going on, there might be pressure to get the back of the pack to speed up. And there might be more of that pressure this year than there would be, in previous years, because it's just not a normal year. But she is running a really, really great race. And I saw her dogs coming into one of the checkpoints a little bit earlier yesterday, and they just looked fantastic. And it is so great to see someone, even though she's not the youngest musher to run, she's 29, which is not very, very young, but she's a young Iditarod musher. And it's always great to see someone who has that much poise and that much confidence coming into their rookie race.
Alex, Casey and Matt are neighbors. They live on the other side of Deception Swamp here in Willow, and they are one of the very few people that train on our trail system here. There's probably only enough to count on a couple of hands, and that's something special. And in our local trail group, we always give shout outs to our local mushers and how they're doing in Iditarod and Quest and all that. And it's good to have, I guess, a hometowner that's representing in the Iditarod, and I hope she does well. We talked about Matt with his deal with his dog earlier earlier. And I think that these guys have something to be very proud of with Team Matt Failer on the trail this year.
Absolutely. And, as we like to say often, I'm not sure we've said it a lot this year, the people who are running the puppy teams, it's a very important thing to do to get these dogs used to being in a race, to be used to the trail conditions, because these dogs, these yearlings, these dogs are the dogs that in 2 or 3 years might be the superstars on the A team.
Yeah, for sure. Alex, we're just about out of time, and we need to give a shout out to our fans. I got a whole bunch of messages since we were on air last night about folks wishing us well and thanks for doing what we do. People from all over the world. A lady from Norway sent us a message saying that she listens in the morning with her coffee and all of that. So we definitely got to give a shout out to our fans, especially on Facebook and Twitter. Anybody in particular you want to shout out to? Any of your Twitter buddies that spend up all night with you talking Iditarod?
I want to thank Brad, who's a new Twitter buddy of mine. We had a very interesting conversation this afternoon about what might happen if they were to stop the race, and so I very much appreciate that. Of course, always appreciate talking to the ugly dogs, and wanted to remind people that if you are interested in helping Alaskan schools, and that's particularly something that's needed now that a lot of these schools are going to be closing for a while, go to igivearod.com, and there are lots of school projects that you can donate to if you have a few extra dollars.
Excellent. Alex, is there anything in the pipe that you want to mention that maybe a teaser or two that we're going to talk about in the coming days?
I think we'll be talking about what exactly is happening on the Bering Strait. I think the Bering Coast, there's going to be a lot more weather. It's supposed to snow pretty heavily on the coast for the next day, and that is going to have a big effect. And, as Dallas Seavey said this afternoon, we've got ourselves a dog race right now. So there's a lot of exciting stuff that's going to happen over the next 24 to 48 hours.
Very good. Thank you very much for joining us today, guys. And be sure to hit that subscribe button so you get these episodes as soon as they drop. Otherwise, they are typically on air at about 8 o'clock Alaska time. That is midnight on the East Coast. And for folks that do stay up all night like Alex on Twitter, you will see it pop up there at about midnight your time. Alex, thank you very much for joining us today. We'll talk again tomorrow.
All right. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. On behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio. Did you know that Alaska Dogworks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dogworks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.